you have acute anxiety, in some cases chronic, but acute anxiety in, say, terminal cancer patients,
Yeah.
which Hopkins has also is a population Hopkins has worked with.
Yeah.
And in those cases, the shift to openness can be life-changingly positive.
Well, I don't know if it's the shift to openness exactly, or if it's the religious aspect of the experience.
True.
Yeah,
True.
I think,
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
if you have ego dissolution, that can do something for fear of death.
Oh, yeah. I also think that's phenomenal research. It's unbelievably interesting. Um, and it's certainly the case that, like, I firmly believe that the world is not the way we perceive it. It's deeply strange, and I do believe that the hallucinogens reveal that. Um, and I don't think that attempts to drive them underground have been particularly fruitful. One of the consequences of the war on drugs is now we have like 500 psychoactive chemicals instead of 20 or 30, because chemists keep chasing the laws. And so making it illegal doesn't look like a good solution. I wouldn't that doesn't mean we have a good solution.
Yeah. Yeah. 100% agreed. I mean, if you just look also at, black market synthesis of something like MDMA, you have deforestation in Cambodia, or you have chemicals being dumped in Holland, which is a real nexus for production. If you legalize and regulate and tax that as you would any other industry, then many of those problems cease to be problems, not to make it sound easy. But I agree with you, as I suppose what I'm saying. I have to ask, before we go to Viktor Frankl, if you're able to put words to it, in what ways do you think reality is deeply strange? Can you elaborate on that in any way?
There's a narrative aspect to it, there's a religious aspect to it, there's a meaningful aspect to it that we don't understand. We can't understand it scientifically, or we haven't been able to. The scientific viewpoint excludes that to some degree. And I think the best evidence for that probably does come from hallucinogenic experience. Now, people have a biologically instantiated religious instinct. Now, it's possible that that only speaks of our peculiar biological nature, that it doesn't reflect broader reality as such. But if you go deep enough into the psyche, it becomes increasingly difficult to separate what you discover from reality. Now, it's not, people can clearly have individual subjective religious experiences. Most scientific phenomena are objective. Many people have to experience the phenomena at the same time. You have these religious experiences that can be induced by hallucinogens, let's say. Each person has their own particular experience, but everyone has an experience that's similar. And we don't know what to do about that category of experience. And then, we think in stories and we see the world through a structure of value. I think that has been proven beyond a doubt by neuroscientists and psychologists. And the fact that we see the world through a prism of value seems to indicate that there's something about value that's real. And so that's partly why things are deeply mysterious. I mean, Rick Strassman, he terrified himself right out of the DMT research, as far as I could tell, because all his subjects came back and said, well, I went somewhere else and saw aliens. It's like, well, it was a dream. No, sorry, wasn't a dream, was way more real than any dream. In fact, it was actually more real than life. Well, what do you do with that? What do you do
Well,
with that?
especially when it's every subject, or almost every
Yeah,
subject, and not
exactly.
one out of 30.
Yeah, exactly. No one knows what to do with that. We don't know what to do with that at all. And yeah, I mean, it's beyond comprehension.
It is deeply, deeply strange. One of the images that I I paused on in one of your lectures online, it was an older lecture, I believe, was a side-by-side comparison of two drawings, one of, or I should say, a piece of artwork of the Scandinavian tree of life
Yeah,
and the Peruvian Amazonian tree of life.
yeah.
And if you don't mind taking a moment just to describe that, or I could try to recall it. it was really striking. And then you shortly thereafter had a drawing your son had put together, and the overlap was really hard to wrap your head around in some respects.
No, the drawing my son made, yeah, I have it in my office. He was about 6 when he made it. It's stunning. On one side, there's a forest full of pine trees, and then there's a river running down the middle. Then on the other side, there's a town, but the town is all mushrooms, like Amanita muscaria mushrooms. So all the houses have mushroom caps, and so there's an order. There's order on one side and chaos on another, and a river runs between them. And then out of the river grows a beanstalk, and the beanstalk stretches up to heaven. The clouds are there, and St. Peter's there by the gates. And like, it's not like my son had any particular Christian religious education. Like, he didn't. We didn't go to church. And I saw him draw that, and I thought, that's unbelievable. I can't believe you drew that, because it's a shamanic drawing. It's chaos and order. Those are the two subsets of existence. Right at the point they meet, out of the river grows the tree of life. It reaches up to heaven. That and the shaman, they climb the tree of life, and they go to heaven. And when Mircea Eliade, people who studied the shaman, many of them thought that if the experience was drug induced, that somehow it had been pathologized. That wasn't part of the actual tradition, but I think that's completely wrong. Is that people have been using psychoactive drugs to transcend their consciousness for God only knows how long. One of the most interesting hypotheses I ever encountered, I think that was Terence McKenna. He thought that psilocybin mushrooms and human beings co-evolved.
Yeah.
So who knows?
The stoned ape hypothesis. Yeah,
Mhm.
and what's further more interesting is that we are not the only species who seeks altered states of consciousness.
Yeah, I have a little book about animals who seek out psychoactive experiences, flies even. That's why Amanita muscaria is called, what is it, the fly agaric, because flies
Fly agaric.
will, will go eat
I
it and
didn't
get
know that.
stoned. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Even flies, reindeer.
Even flies.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
very strange. It's very, very strange.
it is very safe to say that we do not know what to do with that.
Yeah, well, and we also don't know what to do with things we don't know what to do with. That's the problem with opening Pandora's box, is that if you have your life reasonably well conceptualized, and then you have an experience that indicates to you that you just don't know what the hell's going on at all. It's like,
Yeah,
well, what do you do then?
yeah. And in fairness, this is maybe a subset of what you're describing, but a term I was introduced to by Roland was ontological shock.
Yeah,
And
the fewer of those, the better.
yeah, for that reason, these are not compounds to be taken casually.
Well, ontological shock produces post traumatic stress disorder. There's a whole literature on they don't call it ontological shock. It's generally termed something like disruption of fundamental axioms, but it's exactly the same idea. And one half of that's terror and the other half is awe. And that's why trips can go bad, because you can get the terror side of the ontological shock.
Which is also why the therapeutic wrapper that is used by, say, Hopkins or by MAPS, who is working with the MDMA assisted psychotherapy, is so important, because these compounds can re-traumatize or traumatize if used in an irresponsible context, or even if used responsibly. Quite frankly, that
Right.
risk exists.
Well, because even the safety precautions that are put in place, they can certainly decrease the probability that the trip will be negative, but that doesn't mean they alleviate the ontological shock. They do it at the moment, so it doesn't go astray during the trip. But you know, there's still the long-term sequelae to consider.
I need to use that word more. Sequelae. That is a great word.